Today, I'm going to be looking at the highest grossing slasher movie of all time in the box office, Halloween. Parentheses 2018. While it was positively received upon release, this movie has created a divide in the Halloween fanbase, with one side thinking it lived up to the hype, while others preferred older installments. But what do I personally think of the movie? Meh. Halloween 2018 is very frustrating to watch, as I feel the movie brings a bunch of good ideas to the screen but doesn't capitalize on them. But what exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's take a close look at the movie's flaws step by step, and stick around until the end of the video to see how I would improve the flaws of this movie. This is my Halloween 2018 retrospective. Each chapter of this video will go over specific issues I have with this movie, leading up to the final chapter where I explain how I would improve these issues. But this section is actually something I don't have a problem with, but I feel like it's worth discussing. So Halloween 2018 decided to ignore every Halloween sequel that came before it, starting fresh 40 years after the original movie. This led to some of the fanbase bringing out their pitchforks and knives, feeling like they were disrespected with this decision. Guys, it ain't that deep. Nobody wants a sequel to Resurrection, bro. I promise you that. The majority of audiences haven't even seen Resurrection, or the majority of Halloween sequels for that matter. The ultimate goal of filmmaking for the studios funding these projects is to make money, y'all, and sometimes, I'm just gonna say it, that ain't always a bad thing. This franchise needed a breath of fresh air to get away from the baggage that was left behind decades ago. Because Halloween 2018 decided to ignore all the sequels to the original movie, that meant that the whole Michael, Laurie, brother-sister thing that was established in Halloween 2 doesn't exist anymore, and I am very happy with that decision. As I said in my H2O video, and go watch it by the way if you haven't already, it's a banger, I promise. Michael Myers is more scary when he's not just chasing around his family members, when he has no clear motivation. Along with Michael no longer being related to Laurie Strode, having this clean slate meant that we could bring this character more back to his roots. In the original movie, Michael wasn't the Terminator or anything. Yeah, he survived from stabbings from Laurie and getting shot 6 times by Dr. Loomis, but who knows, bro could have missed. Michael did what he did in the original through his wits, outsmarting his victims the entire movie. He didn't just rely on having super strength and being able to eat bullets like they're Cheetos. Especially with Myers now being 61 years old in this movie, I was excited to see him return to a more smart and methodical killer rather than just a Jason Voorhees clone. That didn't happen, did it? Now it's time to get into issues I have with this movie, but first I have to say James Jude Courtney is the best Michael Myers actor since the OG himself, Nick Castle. And after Halloween fans had to suffer through terrible Michael Myers mask after terrible Michael Myers mask for like 30 years, this movie finally got it right. Shout out to that sweet, sweet modern technology. Hey now, our cars don't fly and life expectancy may be going down in the last few years, but at least we can finally get a Michael Myers mask right guys? Here we have a movie that features an old beat up Michael Myers mask for the first time in the franchise. Oh, wait. Here we have a movie that features a recreation of the original Michael Myers mask for the first time, and it's glorious. It's interesting comparing the actual original mask in real life to the one they created for this movie. It just seems like the mask is melting in real life. It's understandable why they didn't go with that approach for this movie. What they settled on does a great job of looking just like the original, while clearly establishing that Michael is indeed older now. Okay, are you guys tired of all this positivity? I sure am. If I love the performance and mask of Michael Myers so much in this movie, what could I possibly criticize about it? Well, Michael Myers just really feels out of character in this movie. Once the bus transferring him crashes and he escapes to Haddonfield, he really feels directionless. In the original movie, once Michael escaped, he quickly picked a target, Laurie Strode, and then stalked her friend group and slowly picked them all off one at a time. In this movie, Michael just starts killing random nameless characters, going from house to house with no clear direction. Michael Myers in this movie really just feels like a dumb animal with a murder boner. He doesn't seem to put much thought into his actions. He often just gets carried by the dumb actions of the victims he's going after. No! In the original, there was a fun playfulness that Mikey used for every kill. He hid in Annie's car, he hid in the cabinets when he heard Bob was gonna go get some beer from the fridge, and he put on this cute little ghost costume to hide in plain sight from Linda. Not only does Michael enjoy killing, he enjoys stalking his victims too, instilling fear in the victims and the audience before he goes for the KO. But what does Michael do in this movie? He arrives in some random neighborhood, walks through the lady's back door and quickly kills her with a hammer, then walks through the neighbor's back door and quickly stabs her with a knife, then moves on. Michael really just feels like a Jason Voorhees clone in this movie. What these movies need to do to instill fear into the audience is to have the villain focus on one target and have the audience get to know the character who is in danger so we can be scared for them as the tension keeps rising. But Michael doesn't care about any one character in this movie. He just seems to want to stack up the body count as high as possible. He even blows his cover before arriving to Haddonfield as he murders 4 people at a gas station before he makes it back to town. All he needed to do was steal the mask and slip away, but he directly alerted the authorities that he was at large before the sun even went down. The only bit of creativity and playfulness we get from Michael is when he hides behind a closet door of one of the babysitters, and that's ruined with the kid breaking the tension. Oh shit! And then the babysitter slips and falls on the floor, making every single audience member roll their eyes. Oh yeah, speaking of the comedy, why don't we get into that? Now, I'm not going to be the first one to say this, but this movie leans too far into comedy at various moments, which ruins tension. Look, comedy can absolutely be a good thing in horror movies. When a horror movie can successfully earn a laugh from the audience, it does a great job of making the movie feel smart, like it's not taking itself too seriously. And when a scary movie doesn't attempt any comedy at all, the audience can easily get bored and feel like the movie is dragging. So with the film's director, David Gordon Green, having a comedy background, it was definitely a good thing to insert some jokes here or there while the tension is low. But goddamn, they just don't seem to know when to turn it off.
Up, clipping my nasty ass toenails.
Have you ever really liked a girl and you just couldn't have her?
I got peanut butter on my penis.
Chocolatey homemade brownie, I made that myself.
That's like what a 5-year-old would eat if they could make their own lunch.
That last clip was a scene in the 3rd act that is inserted in the middle of 2 very intense scenes. These scenes just all break the tension that was set up before, and it's difficult to constantly switch gears and bring the tension back. The original Halloween movie didn't have much comedy at all. It was there, sure, but the movie knew when to put its head down and get to work. Moving on. In this section, I'll be talking about all the side characters with the exception of Laurie's daughter Karen and her granddaughter Allison, who I'll talk about in the next section. We start the movie with the podcasters, who are really just here for exposition. They're fine in this role, I guess, but it's just weird because they feel like the main characters at the very start of the movie just for them to get killed off at the end of the 1st act. They are really terrible at their job though. Why did Bro stand behind Michael and show him his mask from behind? I would have believed the fear in his eyes more if he was standing in front of Michael.
You feel it, don't you, Michael? You feel the mask.
That's so dumb. And the interview with these two with Laurie was not very well executed.
So is he real?
Who?
The boogeyman.
That was a waste of $3,000. I have to say though, their death scene in the gas station bathroom was probably the best scene in the movie. Once Dana discovers it's Michael pursuing her, the jokes stop, and seeing her crying as her life ends is pretty sad. It's well done. What about the other side characters? Well, we got Cameron, who is probably my least favorite character in the entire franchise. This buffoon's only real impact on the plot is when he throws Allison's phone in some dip at the school dance. Why does he do this? Well, because Allison discovered him cheating on her. Makes sense to me. He goes from the boring nice boyfriend to mustache twirling levels of cartoonish assholishness in one scene.
You gonna get that? Or you want me to get it?
And then he disappears for the rest of the movie. What a pointless character. At least he returns in the sequel for an undeserved redemption arc. Yay. There are some side characters I do like in this movie though, like Officer Hawkins. Frank Hawkins is probably my favorite new character introduced in this movie. He was there in 1978, so he knows the danger that Michael presents to the town. He even tells Michael's doctor, I'm not gonna let justice get in the way of what's right. My dumbass teenage self watching this in the theater was like, hell yeah, but then bro got dropped off by Sartain like 2 minutes later. This dude Hawkins got stabbed in the neck, stabbed multiple times in other spots of his body, and was run over by a car, and he somehow survived and was brought back for the next movie. It makes sense they'd retconned his death in this movie since he was such a fan favorite, but if we're looking at this movie as a sole entity, it's very disappointing to see him booted out of the finale. Then we have Sheriff Barker, who is the most wasted character in the entire Halloween franchise. This dude is such a Chad. I mean, look at that cowboy hat. I wanted to see this man fight Michael with his bare hands. Instead, he got like 10 lines in the entire trilogy, only being here to look incompetent. I thought we'd see more of him in the sequel since Hawkins clearly died in this movie, but that wasn't in the cards, was it? Finally, let's talk about Dr. Sartain. The 3rd act of this movie kicks off with Dr. Sartain saving Michael's life by killing, yes I said it, killing Officer Hawkins in order to protect Michael. This is one of the most hated moments in the entire franchise, and it's all about execution. I mean, come on, dude, that's funny as hell. Then Sartain takes Michael to Laurie's house so they can have a final battle, meaning that Michael does not care about Laurie at all. As I said, he feels like a directionless, dumb animal in this movie. As soon as Sartain delivers Michael to Laurie's house, he gets his face stomped on, ending his story. The idea of Michael's doctor turning insane after observing him for all this time is actually a very interesting idea to me, and it paints Dr. Loomis in an even better light since he kept his head straight. But in the end, this plot twist just feels like the only way the writers could think of bringing Michael to Laurie for a big finale. The plot twist is way too silly in execution and just feels like a plot contrivance to bring the two main characters together. But I'll get into how I would fix this character more in the final chapter. It's time to talk about the main characters of this movie that aren't named Michael Myers, including Karen, Allison, and finally, Laurie. Let's start with Karen, shall we? As a diehard H2O defender, it's going to be impossible for me to not compare Karen to John, who is Laurie's son in the H2O timeline. Their characters are basically the same, except their genders are different, they have about a 20 years age difference, and Karen's dialogue is just awful.
The world is not a dark and evil place. It is full of love and understanding, and I'm not letting your psychotic rants confuse me or convince me otherwise.
I like Judy Greer a lot as an actress, but she wasn't given much here. The attention is directed more towards Allison since the movie is trying to show the effects of generational trauma. Overall, Karen is fine, I suppose. Her arc in this movie is that she learns that her mother was correct in being paranoid of Michael, which isn't really a character arc, it's just her being wrong and learning that she was wrong through the circumstances they get themselves in. Let's talk about Allison now. Allison should have been the main character of this movie. Of course, that would never happen with Jamie Lee Curtis being in this movie, because if you get Jamie Lee Curtis to be in your Halloween movie, you're gonna use as much of her as possible. But they could have done what Scream 5 eventually did, bringing back legacy characters but putting the main focus on the new leads that would lead the franchise into the future. I can't help but look at Allison as a missed opportunity. This movie is about generational trauma. Focus the story front and center on the victim of that, not the one who experienced the trauma. There are a million different ways this movie could have gone with Allison, and what they chose was pretty disappointing. She's a smart, level-headed gal being in the honor society, and her main story in this movie is a relationship with a doofus who cheats on her halfway through. If you want to make a movie about trauma through generations of a family, show it. Show Allison being naturally afraid of other people, not trusting her surroundings. Have her resent her family for the damage they've caused her. Because as she sits in Halloween 2018, she has seemingly bypassed all possible negative effects of growing up in her family. If Michael never escaped the bus, she would have gone to college fine and operated as a normal person. You could say this is a kudos to her parents for raising her right, but is this really an interesting story about generational trauma? Oh, and if you think I've said the word trauma too much, trust me, I'm not the only one who has.
Trauma. It's a movie about trauma. The movie is about trauma. The 2018 movie obviously was a movie about trauma. The whole last movie was a study in trauma.
This movie markets itself as sending a powerful message about the damage families can suffer after going through terrifying events, but it really doesn't, thanks in part to Laurie Strode. I've put it off for long enough. Why don't we finally get into how Laurie Strode is portrayed in this movie? And let's just get the cat out of the bag. Laurie in this movie is just a much more theatrical and outlandish version of the same character we saw in H2O, a movie that dealt with these themes much better. Since this movie came out in a world where Halloween H2O already exists, it has to try and do as many different things as possible despite wanting to tell a very similar story. So how does this movie do that? Just amp up the craziness of the character despite the previous iteration of Laurie having much more reason to be insane than this version does. Let me explain. To briefly talk about 1981's Halloween 2, in that movie, which takes place on the same night as the original, it was established that Laurie Strode is actually Michael Myers' sister, and that's why he wants to kill her. Also in Halloween 2, Michael Myers killed 10 people, substantially adding to his overall body count on that night, as he only killed 5 people in the original movie. Halloween H2O keeps the canon of Halloween 2, while Halloween 2018 pretends that Halloween 2 never existed. So therefore, in Halloween H2O, Michael Myers is Laurie's brother. In Halloween 2018, Michael Myers is not Laurie's brother. The point to all of this is that Laurie in H2O has much more reason than the 2018 version of her character does to be afraid of Michael Myers. In H2O, Michael is Laurie's brother, so she knows that no matter what, she will always be Michael's prime target. Meanwhile, in Halloween 2018, Laurie is not Michael's sister, so that already gives her character much less reason to worry after he's incarcerated. Yet, the version of Laurie that we get in H2O is a much more subtle and realistic representation of how trauma could affect this character. When we as humans suffer through terrible events in our lives, the reality always sets in that the sun comes up every day and life has to move on whether we're ready for it to or not. I just think that H2O's portrayal of Laurie being a school teacher in witness protection, looking fine on the outside but still suffering on the inside, was very realistic and a good way to show the character after all this time. And she actually goes on a character arc, but more on that in a bit. But Laurie in Halloween 2018 is barely a functioning human. After 2 of her friends were killed 40 years ago, it's all she thinks about nonstop. She has destroyed her entire life, and I can't help but think, Laurie, if you just moved away from Haddonfield, you wouldn't have to worry about Michael Myers anymore. I'm not saying this character wouldn't have PTSD from what happened to her in 1978, but this is her character 40 years later. It's so over the top. She has an entire house which is a murder trap for Michael. What job did this lady have to afford all this? She's only 57 in this movie. We don't see or hear about her work history at all. Is she retired already? I think the fact that I'm clearly looking deeper at this than the movie intended, but I'm only looking slightly below the surface, is not a good thing at all. Most importantly though, Laurie doesn't go on a character arc in this movie. In H2O, Laurie is scared to death of Michael, then she finally learns to stand up to him in the third act. It's simple and very effective. But here, Laurie is ready to kill him from the start. She's made it her entire life mission, for God's sake. And side note, it's really frustrating rewatching this movie when we spend a lot of time establishing Laurie's expertise with guns, watching her shooting at the range and owning tons of them, just for her to get 2 shots off at Michael the entire movie. That's just setting up the audience for disappointment. But anyway, the only hint of a character arc we get for Laurie in this movie is when she says this to her daughter in the third act.
I was wrong to raise you the way I did, but at least I can protect you.
If you blinked in the theater, you probably missed this. The revelation comes out of nowhere and it isn't addressed again. Look, not every character in a movie needs a character arc, but nobody in this movie goes on a true arc at all, which just makes for a less interesting story. But how would I go about fixing all these issues I've laid out in this video? Let's finally get into it. Now, I feel it's important to start off this section to establish that obviously I am not a filmmaker. David Gordon Green and everyone involved with the making of this movie obviously know way more about how to make a good movie than I do. And this movie made $250 million at the box office and got good reviews on release. Clearly they did something right. But over time, nobody really talks about this movie anymore. It's largely fading into obscurity. My goal here is just to improve the story of this movie. Okay, glad that's out of the way. The main thing I look to fix in this section is Laurie's character and Michael's motivation. Like I said earlier, Michael only goes after Laurie in the movie because Dr. Sartain brings him to her. Otherwise, Myers never would have even known or cared that she was in Haddonfield. This led to confusion from the audience. Does Michael actually care about Laurie? The movie framed these two as having a two-way obsession, but thanks to the sequel Halloween Kills, we now definitely know that was a bunch of baloney. So Michael needs clear motivation in the film, and we need to properly establish that he does not care about Laurie, but still have an effective way to bring her into the story and do a commentary on generational trauma. And I think I have a solution to that. The main change I want to make to Halloween 2018 is that we need to properly establish that Laurie is in fact the new Loomis. It's fine that Michael doesn't care about her, but let's make it clear from the jump that Laurie is the one pursuing him, not the other way around. But anyway, what's the very first change I'll be making to Halloween 2018? Get rid of the podcasters from the first act. Their only purpose is to feed exposition to the audience and to add to the body count. They simply aren't needed. Remember this part of the interview scene between Laurie and the podcasters?
I think he might speak with you. So why don't you sit down with him and say all the things you must be longing to say?
That is actually a very interesting idea, but they don't go for it in the actual movie. But that's how we're starting my imaginary version of Halloween 2018. So I'll start the movie with Dr. Sartain bringing Laurie to Smith's Grove Sanitarium to meet with Michael face to face. He does this because he wants to study Michael, and by extension Laurie too. And in this ideal version of the movie, Sartain is played by a different actor, ideally someone who the audience can take seriously, put trust into, while also simultaneously be uneased by the performance. I don't have anybody specific in mind, but I imagine an actor along the lines of, say, Patrick Dempsey could play this double-sided character very well. Let me know in the comments who you could see pulling off this character. So this opening scene plays out very similarly to the one we get in the actual movie, but instead of a random podcaster asking Michael if he ever thinks about the victims, it would be Laurie, who was actually a victim herself and friends with the deceased. Instead of a random podcaster screaming at Michael to say something, it would come from Laurie instead, which is just more impactful and consequential to the actual story and characters. And instead of random podcasters having possession of Michael's mask, have Sartain show it to Michael to to try and elicit a response out of him. I think it would be important to show that Sartain himself sought out the original mask that Myers wore, so that his grand plan he came up with to free Michael later makes more sense. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I've complained a lot about how Michael Myers doesn't have enough motivation in Halloween 2018, so I think it's finally time to get into what I think they should have done. Like I said earlier, I think Allison should have been the main focus of this movie, along with her friend group too. Have Michael run into them and stalk them throughout the night as Laurie plays the Loomis role of trying to find Michael, along with Sartain at her side, who will eventually betray her. There's a deleted scene of Halloween 2018 where Allison is on a jog and she discovers a dead dog hanging from a tree, and we see Michael watching her reaction from a distance. This scene is great, it's unsettling, and it would have been a perfect way to show Michael discovering Allison and deciding to follow her and her friend group for the day. We don't really see much of Michael's sister Judith in the original movie, but from what we did see of her, Allison kind of strikes a resemblance, no? I think it would make perfect sense for Michael to arrive back in Haddonfield after 40 years, find this girl who looks like his sister, and start stalking her and her friends, getting to know them. But to stay on the subject of Allison, if we're going to make her the central focus of the movie, I think some changes need to happen to the character. Like I said earlier, Allison in Halloween 2018 as we know it is a pretty boring character, to be honest. So another change, how about we actually make Allison affected by the generational trauma in her family? I think they should have made Karen, Allison's mom, an overprotective mother just like Laurie was to her. Therefore, we can represent Allison as someone who's very untrusting of people around her, but she also recognizes her family is crazy and wants to try and break free from that, which leads her to make bad decisions. I'm clearly spitballing ideas here. Let's focus on how the story shapes up. After the opening scene and credits, we meet Laurie, Karen, Ray, and Allison having dinner together, similar to the scene we got in the actual movie. Here, we can easily establish the family's dynamic. We don't need over-the-top theatrics of Laurie shooting mannequins in her backyard or living in a murder trap. Just show how broken this family has become. Make it feel real. We learn that Laurie's life was devastated from the original attack, and that Karen supports her unconditionally and never challenged any of her potential wrong actions. But we also establish that Allison feels a disconnect from her family as she just wants to live a normal life, dismissing a lot of what they tell her about the dangers of the world. Then we show the bus crash, largely the same as it was presented to us in the actual movie, as I do like that scene. We establish that Sartain was on the bus and that he was carrying a bag with him that had the Myers mask, which is now missing. Sure, you could say that Michael swiftly snatching the bag off of Sartain and escaping into the night would be lame in comparison to what we got, but I think that the scene where we see Michael put on his mask in broad daylight takes away from the mystique of the character. One reason that an iconic movie like Jaws works so well is because they don't show the shark until the third act, people, and Halloween 2018 shows us our shark in broad daylight about 30 minutes in. It's cool for a trailer, but not what's best for a good slasher movie. And also, if Michael heads straight to Haddonfield after the bus crash, this gives police a lot less reason to be worried about a potential Myers return. When Laurie and Sartain confront them about the danger, they could just say, "Laurie, the man is 61 years old now. We don't even know if he was the one who killed the father and son at the bus crash site," and I think the audience would buy it. Without having the police actively chasing Michael, this automatically raises the tension as Michael is roaming Haddonfield undetected. Anyway, after the bus crash scene, we're shown the scene that I mentioned earlier where Allison is on an early morning run when she sees the dead dog and Michael spots her and chooses her as his main target. Meanwhile, Laurie and Sartain have given up on help from the authorities, so they decide to work together to try and hunt down Michael and kill him once and for all, like a buddy cop movie. With a lot of murder. Laurie and Karen try to contact Allison about Michael's potential return, but she ignores them as they've been so overbearing. She tries to continue distancing herself from them. And this is where we can get the classic Halloween stuff. Allison and her friends walking to school being stalked at school, all that good stuff. And another major change I'd like to make to this movie, get rid of the school dance. It serves absolutely no purpose besides Cameron cheating on Allison and him breaking her phone. It's just pointless. So how about instead, Allison's friend is planning a small Halloween party with her and her friends. That'll give us a nice set piece for the third act where Michael can pick them all off one by one. Back to Sartain and Laurie. It's time to talk about how I would do the twist they attempted with Sartain. Well, at the start of the third act, have Laurie and Sartain spot Michael and locate him, and just as Laurie's about to close in on him, Sartain knocks her out and handcuffs her somewhere nearby where nobody can see her, and he takes her phone too. This is where he reveals that this is all according to his plan and that he was the one who definitively crashed the bus. He tells Laurie not to worry as he'll bring Michael to Laurie after Michael's done with Allison and her friends. All you really need to sell this twist is just having Sartain definitively say that he was the one who made the bus crash and free Michael. That's a big enough revelation as it is, and with him having Laurie incapacitated for the third act, this will raise tension for Allison and her friends as the audience will realize that nobody's coming to save them. So at this party, we could have Allison talking to a guy, a love interest, where she quickly rejects his advances and tells him to leave the party despite him being well-intentioned, which would represent her lack of trust with the world thanks to her family's past trauma. And once he kicks her out, he runs right into Michael outside and, well, you know, dies. This could go back to the theme I mentioned earlier where Allison's trust issues with the world thanks to what happened to her family leads her to making bad decisions which cost this guy's life. Allison decides to leave the party after her friends criticize her for ruining the vibe, and she heads home to her quiet house as she sits in her room frustrated. This gives Michael time to execute all their friends, and then Allison returns to the party house to apologize, where she comes face to face with the Shape and we get an awesome chase scene. But right before this chase scene, we see Laurie again, all alone and handcuffed. While I'd like this version of the movie to tone down Laurie's craziness, I'd still like her to be properly trained for the situation, so she finds a way to free herself from the handcuffs locks, like maybe using a stick to pick the lock or something, and then she heads to the house that Allison and Michael are at. Laurie finds Sartain observing on the outside of the house, where she hands him some justice, if you know what I mean, and she makes it inside the house at the last second to rescue Allison and face off against Michael herself, as Allison runs to safety and calls the police. Here we get a big climactic fight between Laurie and Michael that you can show in all the trailers, and this time we actually know that Michael knows who Laurie is since she confronted him in the opening scene, so that adds to the impact. Right as police sirens approach, Laurie emerges victorious from the fight, whether it be a stabbing or a shooting, it doesn't really matter. Laurie goes outside to meet the officers as she urges him to run inside to where she left Michael, and to no one's surprise, he's gone. Through all of this, you might have been wondering, what about Karen? She hasn't been involved much in the story at all. Well, after Michael is discovered to be missing, Laurie heads to Karen and Allison's house, where she discovers Allison absolutely horrified as she discovers that her parents were murdered hours earlier, so they couldn't get in the way of Michael's plan. Through the absolute shock of this moment, with Michael still being on the loose and Laurie and Allison's lives destroyed, you cut to credits and you call it a movie. Now, was that plot reconstruction perfect? Absolutely not. Most of it was just retooled ideas of what we got in Halloween 2018, which is the point, as I felt the movie demonstrated a bunch of good ideas that were lacking in execution. Trust me, after I just spent this entire video nitpicking Halloween 2018, I realized that this new version of the movie I pitched is far from perfect. But I hope the reimagined version of this movie that I pitched can start a new discussion with you guys watching about what a good Halloween movie looks like and what Halloween 2018 could have done better. You know, instead of just saying, the movie was great and people need to stop hating, or the movie was terrible, old Halloween movies are way better. So if you made it this far into the video, comment below your thoughts on Halloween 2018 and what you thought about my ideas for how to improve the movie. And if you think I'm an idiot, well, feel free to let me know that too, I guess. Overall, Halloween 2018 was a very solid entry in the franchise, but it could have been so much more than that. But still, I think all things considered, the filmmakers did a good job of bringing Halloween back to the mainstream, as they introduced a whole new generation to the knife-wielding maniac himself, Michael Myers. This franchise was dead in the water for almost 10 years after the Rob Zombie debacle, and this movie brought the Shape back to life. So I have to say, thank you, David Gordon Green. Join me next time as I take a look back at this film's sequel, Halloween Kills, and hopefully it won't take me a month this time. Sorry about that, guys. That is all for today. I hope all of you have a great day.